Okay, take like 5 or 6 because this is harder than I imagined it would be, and I didn't think it was going to be easy. So multiple people have asked me to show them how I brew coffee with this new acquisition. This is an egg-type reversible coffee maker. Reversible coffee makers were popular in Europe in the late 19th century through the early 20th century until the 1930s when the mocha pot here was introduced and popularized by Bialetti. The mocha pot continues to be popular in Europe to this day, although it is waning in popularity due to the Nespresso machines, actual for real espresso machines, and the French press. It's got more competition. But this was really the thing that made the reversible coffee pots took the reversible coffee pots out of running for a while. Although the reversible coffee pots did continue to be pretty popular up until the 60s and 70s. The more iconic ones are these guys, the Neapolitan coffee makers, named after Naples, Italy, and they are very much identified with Naples. How to use these would have to be a video of its own, but it works on the same principle as the egg type one. However, I've never actually brewed with these because the older one I have here is missing the necessary internals, so I can't do that. I've got a newer one which has the necessary internals. It also sticks quite a bit here. But unfortunately, the lower steam here on the spout leaks like a sieve, and it simply makes a mess rather than coffee. So I have not successfully brewed with either of these, and I don't have a lot of strong expectations for what the reversible coffee pot is going to be like because I've never had the opportunity to actually brew it. So this is the reversible coffee pot, as I say, egg type for obvious reasons. The guy who sold it to me said that he considered it the most over-engineered coffee maker he'd ever seen, but really compared to a lot of them, it's honestly not. It's just a newer model compared to the Neapolitan that's designed to address a number of issues with the Neapolitans. The most obvious one here is this flap that goes over the pour spout. With the Neapolitan, a lot of people think that the vapors, the aromas that come out of the coffee initially are the most important for the flavor, and they had these cute little hats that they would put over the pour spouts to keep that in while it's brewing. This one just has an integrated flap, so they don't have that. Whether or not that first bit of aroma is really all that important is more of a personal decision, let's say. But they had it. The other thing is that the handle screws in and holds the entire contraption together, which makes it a little easier to use than the flip with the Neapolitan, which can actually be a little bit fraught. So, the way this works, you unscrew the handle, like so, and then you take it apart. The top here is the bottom for the heating process. This part of the screen comes off, and then you have to pull out the bottom part of the screen, and we pour in the water. I have about 300 milliliters of water here. I don't know if this is really the typical recipe, but I measured it beforehand, and that's about what it came to, so 300 milliliters it is. Then I put in the screen here, and I've ground the coffee. This is 30 grams of coffee, which is a pretty strong dose for only 300 milliliters of water, so this should be very strong coffee if I do it right. It's medium to coarse ground. I tend to prefer to go a little on the coarse side for something with metal filters, because if you go finer, metal filters are not as effective as paper, and you're going to end up with a very muddy coffee, which this is probably going to be anyhow. So I'm pouring this in. This is basically a drip coffee maker, so it is not tamped. I am, however, settling the grounds a little so even distribution. and I'm putting the top screen on here, and you'll note it latches there. Then I'm putting this top part here on, like so, and it's got a latch that I've got to line up, and now I'm screwing the handle on. At this point, I could have used hot water in the bottom, which would have made this process a little faster, but the downside to that is that you're handling something that's metal and very hot, and that's not fun. So I'm going to turn this on. This is on the stovetop. It'll, I can tell from the patination on this particular one, it hasn't been put over a spirit flame or anything that gave soot. It might have been used on a gas flame, but it may well have strictly been on electric like this. At any rate, I am turning it on to heat up, and I'm going to let that boil. It is supposed to come to a boil, which when it comes to a boil, your guess is as good as mine, but probably 5 or 6 minutes. I am going to pause the video because ain't nobody got time for that. Okay, so this has been heating for about 15 minutes now. I used the rather scientific method of putting an instant read thermometer against the metal wall of the lower half here to see what the temperature was. Waited till it got up to about 185, which might be a little too hot, but we'll find out. At this point, this is why it's called reversible. I take it and I reverse it. Note that the steam is coming out of it. I'm going to flip this cover over, keep that steam in. At this point, the hot water is going to be dripping through those screens with the coffee, and hot coffee is accumulating in the lower half. That's a process that's probably going to take about 6 or 7 more minutes, so I'm going to pause the recording again and come back when that is done. Alright, moment of truth. This has been filtering through for the last about 7 minutes. Let's see what happens. We should be getting coffee right now. Alright. We have ourselves our coffee, which I should have probably poured over where the camera could see it. And I would say it's a decent enough cup of coffee. It's about similar in strength to a French press, but I would actually have to characterize it as cleaner. It doesn't have the muddy notes that I am used to with French press. That might be because I used well, no, I actually used a finer ground than I normally use for French press, so I'm guessing it's because the strainers are a little higher quality than is typical for a French press. But it's a pretty clean notes, decent enough coffee, but start to finish roughly half an hour to get a cup of coffee, and this only yields about 2 cups of coffee. So it's a lot of work for not a lot of coffee. It is relatively strong coffee. So you might be able to, some people might prefer smaller cups, but also because of the nature of this particular maker, you can't cycle it, you can't turn it around very fast, you gotta wait for it to cool off before you can disassemble it, empty it out, rinse it out, and then try again. So I don't know that I would want to use this as a daily driver. It is a decent cup of coffee, so I can't say not, but again, not my particular preference, and I can see why people switched over to the mocha pot and later other options that managed to be faster and give credible cups of coffee with a lot less effort. But this is, again, a reversible stovetop coffee maker, probably early 20th century, sometime between the 1900s and the 1940s. I'm guessing 1910 through 1930, somewhere in that range. And it will go on the shelf with the other ones.